Okay, hi there, yearbook. We are talking more about design, and today I'm obviously not in my office. I'm in my kitchen because it's a sunny day and I decided to sit next to the window and enjoy the sunlight. Today we're going to be talking about designing with color, and that's kind of an important thing to consider when we are designing, especially for the yearbook. I'm going to have you take notes in your notebook, and let's get started. So the first thing that I want you to construct in your notebook is just a very basic color wheel. So a color wheel, a way to think of it is it's just a sequence of logically arranged colors. But if you would go ahead and draw this real quick for me and then label it with all the names of the colors. Okie dokie. I'll give you a second. Cool. Hopefully you pause me if I went too fast. Alright, so we're going to be talking about first some terms having to do with colors. Then we're going to be talking about color schemes. Baby might be waking up. I think we're good. Okay. Uh-oh. This is what baby looks like. I think we're okay. Okay. Sorry, I digress. So, terms first. So the first term that we're going to be talking about is primary. So your primary colors, and this might be a refresher for some of you that have had an art course with me or remember it from grade school, but your primary colors are red, yellow, and blue. And they're primary colors because they are our foundation colors. They are the colors that create all other colors from them. You cannot create them from scratch. You can't like mix two colors to make red. They're your base colors to work with. When you use primary colors in a color scheme or like on a spread or designing with your three primaries, they are very, very dynamic when they're paired together because they're very opposite of each other on the color wheel. This can be sometimes overwhelming, and sometimes when you use this color scheme it's very childish looking. You'll notice a lot of children's toys, a lot of children's designs are done in primary colors because they have a lot of contrast, and kids like contrast and energy. So secondary colors are green, violet, and orange. We don't say purple even though it's labeled purple. Purple is the slang term for violet. The academic term is violet. We want to use violet. So we create our secondary colors by mixing two primaries. So the mathematical equation for that would be P plus P equals S. So our two primaries that make green are yellow and blue. You can see that green lives in between yellow and blue. The two primaries that make orange are yellow and red. And then the two primaries that make violet are red and blue. So when you use your secondary colors, again, these are very dynamic because they have a lot of contrast when grouped because they are very far apart from each other on the color wheel. Alright, tertiary colors. So tertiary colors are created by mixing a primary and a secondary color. So our mathematical equation for that is P plus S equals T. They're halfway in between a primary and a secondary color. So that if a primary and a secondary color had a baby, mixing those two colors would create your tertiary color. When we label our tertiary colors, or when we name them, we describe them using the primary color first, followed by the secondary color. So here we have an example. Yellow-green is the color to describe the tertiary color that's made by mixing green and yellow. Yellow-orange, we don't say orange-yellow. We always name the primary color first when we are talking about those colors. So again, tertiary colors created by mixing a primary and a secondary color. Alright, so now we're going to talk about some color schemes. And color schemes are important to know about because when we are using colors on a spread, we are working with color schemes usually. So our first color scheme that we're going to be describing is a complementary color scheme. A complementary color scheme is made by using two colors that are opposite from each other on the color wheel. So because they're opposite, they're like cats and dogs, north and south, Lannisters and Targaryens, Game of Thrones reference. Yellow and purple or violet are across from each other on the color wheel, so they are the most different. They're the most, I don't know, contrasting. So what this does is it creates a lot of visual energy. It creates a lot of visual tension because they aren't like neighbors next to each other. They don't kind of get along. They're like oil and water. They separate. So what you'll see is a lot of sports teams use complementary color schemes because it creates a lot of energy when their players are out on the field or the court. Example being the LA Lakers. Yellow and violet are their colors. So it creates a lot of visual energy when you utilize complementary colors. That being said, when you put it on a spread, again, it creates a lot of energy. It's a very dynamic thing, so you wouldn't want to use complementary colors on a spread that's a little bit more traditional, subdued. Maybe it's for a sports spread. It's a really active theme. It's like really bright and exciting. Contrasting or complementary colors would be a great color scheme to use in that case. So you have to be careful when you're selecting colors because you might create the wrong feeling not knowing how colors interact with each other. Okay, analogous color scheme. What an analogous color scheme is, it's 3 to 4 colors that are connected on the color wheel. When we use this color palette, it creates a lot of harmony and unity, and that's because they are literally connected. They're kind of like close to each other, they're neighbors, they're touching each other on the color wheel, they're very similar. So here you can see these are all of our analogous color combinations off to the side, and they kind of just have this soothing way about them. So an analogous color scheme is really great to use if you don't want your colors to really distract from the content, but yet you want to inject colors into your spread. Okay, so cool colors versus warm colors in our color schemes. A cool color scheme is made by using blues, violets, and greens. This can create a calming or relaxing feeling when used, or it can also convey kind of a sad feeling or make a person feel cold. In contrast, if you use a warm color scheme, you're using a lot of reds, oranges, yellows. This can be very exciting, but it can also come off and be kind of aggressive or hostile. So you kind of have to think about how you're experimenting and using these two palettes, these two color schemes. So some more terms that we're going to be describing and learning about. These are important because when you're working with colors, particularly in Photoshop or Illustrator, they'll have these terms to use and adjust with your color. So a hue is a pure color within a space. It's another term for a color. So hue is just the pure term for a color. It's a hue of orange, it's a hue of green. It hasn't been altered at all. Saturation, this is very important. So saturation is talking about the intensity of a color or how much it differs from white. If a color is fully saturated, it is a pure hue, it is bright and intense. Versus the more you saturate it, saturated out, less saturation, it becomes more bleached out. So you go from bright to dull. So here you can see we have a pure saturation of red. When we do a 50% saturation, we're getting a little bit more pastel. And then a 25% saturation, now we've injected a lot of white into this, making it more white. Now it's become a pink. Okay, value, it's the measure of a color from light to dark. You can influence the value of a color by adding tint, tone, and shade, and I do want you to write down each one of those terms. When you adjust the tint of a color, you are adding white to it, therefore kind of desaturating it. When you add tone to a color, you're adding gray, which influences it and makes it more subdued. When you're adding shade to a color, you're adding in black and making it a darker value. So here you can see we have tint, tone, and shade with each one of the colors on your color wheel. You can see how it adjusts and influences it. What I want you to notice, particularly with the more yellow hues, your orange, your yellow-orange, your yellow, when you add gray and black to them, they tend to get a little bit more green, and that's because black has a blue base to it. Okay, monochromatic color scheme. When we're referring to a monochromatic color scheme, it's a single base hue that's been extended fully by using tint, tone, and shade. So we have experimented with different values of this hue, and you can see the wide range of colors that are created by adding in tint, tone, and shade. So when you have a monochromatic color scheme, you're experimenting with mono, meaning one, chromo, meaning color, monochromatic. Okay, so lastly, we're going to talk about the difference between an RGB setting and a CMYK setting. When you're setting up a document on Photoshop or Illustrator, you might have the opportunity to adjust which kind of color that you're going to be using. So here's where it gets important. So RGB is referring to red, green, and blue. This is made using light. RGB is subtractive, and so that's how those colors are created. Red subtracted green equals yellow, that sort of thing. This is more having to do with the science of colors, versus CMYK, we're referring to cyan, which is blue, yellow, and magenta, which is a kind of red hue, and then key, which is black. And this is made when we are working with ink. So when we're designing on Yearbook Avenue or in Photoshop or anything, we want to make sure that our program is set to display in CMYK mode, because then we will be accurately getting the colors for when our yearbook is printed out, because they print them out in CMYK. If you look at color printers, usually they are if they're a nice expensive inkjet, you'll see little ink registers for CMYK. So now you know what that is. And that is additive. So by combining cyan and magenta through a layering process, you're able to create violet. When you're combining yellow and magenta through a layering process, so adding them together, you create an orange versus subtracting through RGB. Okay, so next we're going to show you a video where another yearbook advisor is talking about how we select colors to use in our yearbook. What I want you to pay attention to is how she discusses how you should pull your colors and some things to be aware of when you're working with color on a spread. Okay, so watch that video, take some notes, and I will talk to you guys later. Have a great rest of your day. Bye, Yerds.
Color absolutely helps to set the theme and concept of a book, and it is incredibly important to select the right palette for your book. There's the obvious years when you do a school pride book, and obviously you're going to pick your school colors, and that sets a tone right away. When your reader sees the school colors on the cover, they instantly feel that connection with your school. But most schools aren't going to do school colors every year, and I would encourage them not to use the school colors every year. And color sets mood and tone. But if your theme is a little more edgy or a little more fun or a little more contemporary, that's the year that you may want to look at what is Pantone saying that will be the hot colors. And we want to use some of those fun, edgy colors. There are so many design elements that can really be enhanced by the use of color. Some that come to mind are the use of headlines, caption boxes. Something that looks, I think, really sharp and polished and professional is when you use a big drop letter in your copy for your article, and you might put that in a color that you're pulling out on your spread. You might have a folio element that you would want to use your color, or your theme or your book may have a certain logo or icon or some type of graphic element where it could be really effective to use color. There certainly are some guiding principles that designers and yearbook staffs want to keep in mind when they're using color. I think the most basic rule that probably all designers know is to pull color from the dominant photo. And you can easily do this with some of the tools using an eyedropper tool. You can even pull that color out exactly. But that's one great tip. The color from the photograph should be the color that pops the most on the page. I think that is a hard and fast rule for a good reason, because that does exactly what you want the color to do. You want it to highlight your photo, because that's what your book's all about, and it's going to help lend importance to that photo. There are definitely ways that we want to avoid using color. Clearly, when you're writing copy, whether that's an article or captions, it's not very readable in color. Black is really best suited for those instances. I also think that just because we have access to color, we don't want to overuse it. Some schools might think that a busy color background would enhance their book some way, but really there's so much power in white space. I've found we don't have to train them much. They are inspired by everything around them. We're in such a colorful world. Let them be inspired by that. In fact, it could even be something that they see in nature. If they see something from a trip to the beach, or something from a walk in the woods, or their grandma's garden, and they see. So I think just train them to see the beauty and color everywhere in their life.